All right, it's a couple minutes after the hour, so I suppose I'll start with my quick little spiel. There's a I put the link to the Ceph pad in the chat. Feel free to sign in there or add any topics you'd like to discuss. If you haven't joined this group before, we're just a bunch of sysadmin type people who manage Ceph clusters and usually in scientific or research computing environments. And this is just an open discussion. I don't particularly present or anything. We're just chatting about whatever affects us and what's going on in the Ceph world for us lately. Keep in mind these meetings are recorded and posted to the Ceph YouTube channel. I'd like to apologize. I meant to get one going in August, but between life and work was busy. A project I work on had a CubeSat launch in late July, and I just slipped my mind, unfortunately, so I forgot to set that one up, but I made sure to get one in September here. With that, anything, I tend to just go through the topics one by one. If you want to add anything there, otherwise feel free to speak up. So, or if anybody's new to the group and wants to introduce themselves or what type of clusters they run or anything like that, we can do that first.
There's a hand raised.
Is there? I'm not as familiar with blue jeans. I'm pretty sure I took a selfie like that at Ceph during open days, Dan.
Exactly.
Hi, this is Joel. I have not joined the call before, so I just figured I'd say a quick hello and quick intro. I'm at the National Solar Observatory in Boulder, Colorado, and just starting on a Ceph journey. We've got basically 6 petabytes in Octopus right now, pre-production. It'll probably grow significantly over the years, so I don't have I have no operational experience at this point. I've done some builds, some upgrades, starting to learn Ceph, but I'd just be interested in hearing what people have learned along their own Ceph journeys, kind of what you wish you would have known at the outset. So just a quick intro and hello.
Well, welcome, Joel.
Are you running your Ceph environment on SUSE, Red Hat, CentOS, Debian, whatever flavor?
Right now, we're on Ubuntu 2004.
What's your primary use case going to be? Rados Gateway, CephFS?
Rados Gateway. Yeah, that's actually the only client we're going to be running.
Cool. Seems quite a popular option in this group. It's hard to say any specific and immediate things to know. It's just a learning curve for everything, and pay attention to tunables and settings, I suppose. A couple years back, I ran into a scaling thing around that 6 petabyte mark you're starting at, and that caused me some grief. But other than that's kind of been fixed and patched since then.
what are the size of your nodes and how many nodes do you have?
So right
The
now
6
we've got
petabytes.
about 25 OSD nodes, and they've got 18 OSDs in each node, and they're about 14 terabytes in size each OSD.
Those are HDDs, I guess, yeah?
Yes.
And then do you have BlockDB on an SSD or NVMe?
No, right now it's just everything on the single OSD.
Okay. It might be, so you're using this for S3, is that what you said?
Yes.
So you'll probably find slow, like the bucket indices will be very slow. So things like listing the buckets, especially when they get large, this will get slow. It would be worth, probably you'll find it would be worth buying a small amount of flash and moving the bucket indices onto some flash only OSDs. You don't really need a lot, but you just need enough to be redundant.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah. We have a cluster like that. Our backup S3 cluster is like that. The OSDs for the data are HDD only, old hardware, and then the SSD into each server, and we use that as the bucket indices. And it's okay. S3, it depends on your use case, but if you have a use case with like lots of small objects, you can it can take a long time to, like later when you need to rebalance data around, there's lots of small objects. This can take a long time, longer than like those of us that are running block storage. Rebalancing is usually quite quick because the objects are all something like 4 or 8 megabytes and it's uniform. But with S3, if you let people do anything, then they can have a few kilobyte sized objects, and then you end up having to move around billions of them, which takes longer.
Well, how do you limit them to do that?
How do you limit
How do you
them?
limit people to do? Because it's in the end it's a S3.
Yeah. Well, if you're coming from like us, I think we normally have the privilege that we know our users closely and we can give them some advice on how best to use the clusters more effectively, I think.
Yeah, in our case, we're kind of lucky because the primary data input to our cluster will be the solar telescope in Hawaii. So we're basically catching data from this telescope that's almost done in Hawaii. So it's a known source, and there will be some variability in that data, but it's basically all going to be the solar observation data. So I think we'll do okay on that account. We'll at least have limited variability in terms of what's being loaded into the cluster.
I guess I'm thinking back to the very early days when we had our S3, when we first put up our S3 cluster, the users had this misconception that, oh, it's object storage. We can just store trillions of tiny objects and it's going to work very well. But in reality, you probably don't want to exceed around 1 million objects per bucket. So if they can use many buckets, it's better if they're going to have really billions of objects. And the object sizes, it's still, I mean, they can store. So in the end, our Atlas, we have an Atlas event server. So each like particle collision is stored in one event, a 1 megabyte event. And they're storing, well, hundreds of millions, because it's not the main storage, but say hundreds of millions. And it's fine. 1 megabyte is fine. That's okay. It's like that's not too small. But if they can do tens of megabytes, that's even easier. It's like the more in the tens of megabytes stuff, that makes it easier for a cluster operator. I would say, right? I guess you guys would agree, wouldn't you? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess one thing I learned with Ceph is to relax, and when things go wrong, let it. So yeah, one thing I learned is to relax when things go wrong, and let Ceph sort itself out. And at one stage we had a panic and tried to fix too much when we should have just waited, and it would have sorted itself out. So and we've been fairly brutal to our cluster, and it survived all that abuse, and we now know what's okay and what isn't, and it does take a little while to get your head around it, coming from sort of a more traditional sort of bunch of sort of network storage.
Yeah, I agree with that. Patience during recovery is key in a lot of instances. Quite good at doing what it does to save your data. Don't keep turning knobs while it's trying to do that, unless you have hosts down or something. And as long as you get your hosts up, it should recover pretty well, and OSDs. I'll just kind of start hitting some of these things down the topic lists of kind of just the broad ones I ask for every one of these is kind of around like anybody have any crazy unexpected outages due to bugs or not due to bugs they maybe cause it and they want to confess to them, upgrade experiences going from Nautilus to Octopus, Pacific, whatever, or if you've noted any important bugs or fixes in the latest releases that can be relevant to anybody else.
Well, I put the firmware information for all of you because I'm currently setting up a new Ceph cluster with a 3000 OSDs, and we found out that half of the OSDs had a different firmware, and there was a critical patch for that, and half of the OSDs were having also a critical patch from that vendor. So I know that half of those disks are coming from Seagate, but they are rebranded from that vendor. But the rest, I don't find what is the specific vendor for them. It's OEM branded disks. But I still remind you that whenever you are facing some issues, there might be also critical firmware bugs on a disk level. And if you're not aware of those, you can ruin your data quite badly. So please do check the firmware levels that they are up to date.
Yeah. In my experience, that's one unless there's something critical, I rarely ever update disk firmware itself. Host, BIOS, network, everything else, but disks I often don't do. It's interesting that you actually had a critical bug with that.
For those firmware upgrades, were you contacted by the vendor to replace those, or did you have bugs and then you inquired with the vendor?
Well, I'm setting up the new cluster, and I was digging around the serial numbers to verify that I have the correct disks on my environment. So pre-acceptance tests, and I was looking with that serial number or the product number, the vendor's site, and I found out that there's a critical update that you should apply immediately. Vendor didn't know that, but well, some in there they knew.
Okay.
Hmm.
We have some new hardware that we've just been delivered, and while burn-in testing, the NVMEs drop off of the bus, and the whole box has to be reset during heavy load. We couldn't find. I don't think this is a known issue, and our procurement people said, okay, it's probably not going to reproduce in production because they were running bad blocks with 8 processes and hammering these things. So we put them in production anyway, and we'll see. But also they could only reproduce this on CentOS 7, and we were running CentOS 8, and I think that they maybe had some weird power management. It seems like it's a power management issue, like it's trying to put the NVMe to sleep or something during the tests. Anyway.
Dan, do you remember which model of that?
Yeah, there's Samsung, is it? Hold on, I have the tab open somewhere here.
Because we had a similar issue on our.
Yeah.
We had similar issue with Western Digital NVMEs on our load tests. 3 of 4 servers go down because of NVMe, and after contacting with the vendor, they checked this hardware and noticed that the old firmware had a bug with when you test on the high load these NVMEs, there are powering off.
Yeah, really? Okay. And then the firmwares and then you couldn't reproduce anymore?
They sent us upgraded NVMe after all, and we couldn't reproduce it because these NVMEs are blocked after this test when we power on the servers again.
Okay.
Did you check the temperature? Because I've seen pretty lowish running temperature for NVMe, so 60 Celsius. And if they are in the end of the machine in a high load, the overall heat from CPUs and other disks can give actually higher temperature for those NVMEs if they are located in the rear of the machines.
Huh.
I don't know. I mean, Enrico's on the line, my colleague. I think they said that they checked the temperature and it was not relevant.
Yeah,
Okay.
we also, and there was our first thought about temperature, but the vendor checked this and said that's okay. That was okay.
Did yours also, did it just stop the NVMe, or did it also affect the other NVMEs on the server? Because in our case, we have to reboot the whole server because it's like the whole box becomes unusable when one of the NVMEs breaks.
The same, but when we reboot the box, we didn't see any of NVMEs, and that was very interesting because we are preparing to create the technical preview, and this is the last test for us. So the only thing we do was contacting the Western Digital, told them what happened, and they asked us to send this hardware.
And if you physically remove it and put it back, it was working?
Reinstall firmware and checked on the low level what happened, and they told us about this firmware bug.
Okay.
We got this NVMEs back 2 weeks ago. Probably in next month we will run tests again and see what the new future will give us.
It's especially interesting because I've seen message on the mailing list recently, people debating how many OSDs to how many block DBs to store on one NVMe. I mean, the reality is now you can buy 2 or 4 by NVMEs, and it's tempting to put lots and lots of BlockDBs on one NVMe. We have on our backup S3 cluster, we're putting 24 BlockDBs on one NVMe.
On our satellite cluster, we put 17 OSDs on one NVMe.
Yeah.
The Sanger's clusters, we put 30 on an NVMe.
Yeah. This is the
Which is
reality.
fine,
And, yeah.
obviously, if the NVMe goes pop, as they do sometimes, then you lose half the OSDs in the system. But
Did that happen to you in production?
yeah, because we get just the occasional NVMe that is where ratings would be fine, and then it would just fail, which is kind of inconvenient. And then obviously you just have to rebuild all the OSDs that were using it. Touch wood, only a couple of them have done it, but it's slightly disappointing. You record all these metrics about device wear, and then they just go and randomly stop for no readily apparent reason anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's happening sometimes once for 2 months or 3 months. One of NVMe's I'm dying, and we are lost 17 OSDs at once. It generates a big load on the back office, but we are prepared for that.
I can just briefly say, and then I have to leave. We did a Nautilus Octopus upgrade that I think I posted on the mailing list, so it went very well. And then the other thing I want to mention is that we had we had a power outage in our data center for 30 minutes and actually up to 2 hours for some of the hosts, and everything came back. We didn't have to manually intervene. The only thing that we did was on the clusters that we still could access during the power outage, we set no out, so that the mon wouldn't decide to restart rebalancing everything while half the machines were missing. But otherwise, everything just recovered itself, and we had no unfound objects or unknown PGs or anything like that. It was a nice recovery, and no blue store corruptions or anything like that either. So, yeah.
Lucky you.
Oh, even some CephFSs and then MDSs were up, and they just stayed hung forever. They were not failing over, and then as soon as the OSDs came back, they just resumed. And actually, I think the MDS had to rejoin, and that took 10 minutes because we have a huge number of active clients, but it recovered, no corrupted file system.
Okay, a huge number of clients. It's 10, 100,
3,000.
3,000. Wow, nice.
Yeah. And the rejoin step depends on the number of open directories. And so that's why it takes 10 minutes to rejoin on this cluster. Something like, I don't know, 200,000 open directories or something like that, according to the open files table. I think I have to go. So I have to take a kid somewhere. So nice to see you all. And
nice to see you.
Don't get cold out there or down there. It's freezing cold place to operate.
Yes, I have to sweep after. Actually, that's what I'm going to do now. Yeah. Okay. Bye.
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 So maybe I will tell about our outage. We experienced a problem in our core switches and had a split brain in the cluster. This cluster with 6,000 of OSDs. After all, when the network came back, the cluster starting to peering, and before the cutover, we had an ongoing backfilling, big backfilling. And after the network came back, everything looks normal. The backfilling starts. There are nothing to repair, nothing unfound objects. Just it looks quite okay. But after 2 weeks, we noticed that it's still backfilling, and he has about 6,000 of PG waiting to backfill and only 15, 16 backfilling ongoing. And we starting investigation about it, what happened inside, and we noticed that there are waiting backfills which could start because the parameter about OSD max backfills was 1, but they are waiting for something, and after internal debug, we noticed that some of shards in placement groups have different states. Some, for example, when we have active backfill wait state, the shards for this PG was peering, active clean, backfilling, and it looks like it wrongly peered. So we're trying to repair the cluster, all the PGs in the cluster with command Ceph PG repair, and it looks like a little better after that, and we're still waiting to end of backfill because we want to check the states again of the cluster. It looks like some split brain in peering, something like that. So if anybody will hit similar issue, just try to repair the PGs and it should be okay.
So the cluster stayed available to your clients through majority of this?
During the network down or after all?
Oh, after the network came back up and you were going through the peering and backfilling for 2 weeks, how was the cluster mostly available for clients?
Yeah, it's 100% available.
Oh, good.
That was very interesting because I found in code in the PG primary log there in the function start recovery PG or start PG recovery. On the start, the code checks if PG is in state recovering or backfilling. So and if it's true, it's break this function, return from this function, and it hits when the global PG state known by monitor was the backfilling wait, and the cluster's trying to backfill this group, and then the OSD was checking the shards and seeing the backfilling or recovering state, returning just from this function and not doing anything. So the peering is the perfect cure for that.
Good to know. Is that still backfilling now? It kind of sounded like it might have been. Or is it all done in 100%?
Yeah, it's ending about 30-20 PGs left. So I think tomorrow I will grab some information from that and check if the states are correct now or if there are any problems.
Mm-hmm. Well, my outage was we had a power event, which couple-hour power outage, but it also managed to fry a bunch of network switches that were behind UPSs, including one of my core switches that hosted majority of my Ceph servers for one of my clusters. And it took a couple of days to get a replacement in, unfortunately. So I had a cluster that was kind of partially, the nodes were up, but without networking. Some of them had network for a couple of days. But as once I got that new switch in and brought up the rest of the network, it took a little time, but it recovered without any lost data or any real problems. Kind of really nice to see a multi-day outage be recovered so easily.
We had issue with one of our production clusters. That was strange because one of the administrators added or replaced the normal with a normal procedure the disk, and it ended in a way that it created OSD 0 in the top level of a cross tree and partially failed. So there was no physical disk OSD 0, but it wasn't in a cross tree in the same level as everything else, like root or default or like that. And it somehow triggered the monitors to fail with the communication. I think that they were trying to balance the data between the ghost OSD and the others. And since it wasn't in a cross tree on a proper place or anything else, the cluster started to view those commands on a monitor database. So we have a lot of delayed writes going on our cluster, and it went so fast, so in a scale so big that we lost 2 of 3 monitor nodes on that cluster, and we had to add more disk space on those nodes to keep up with the growth of the monitor node database, while the cluster were trying to recover itself about this situation. So we were happy that we have a virtual machines on a hypervisor, those monitor nodes, so we could add more disk there on a fly. Well, they were offline, those 2, but still we were able to add some more disk there. But the normal size of the MonDB is like 1 to 2 gigabytes on that cluster, and it went beyond 50 gigabytes. And in the end, it was 91 gigabytes, the size of the MonDB. So it was beyond any safe boundaries that we were thinking of on that cluster. And it was just adding OSD partially with a Ceph volume command. And the cluster is Nautilus, so we are moving that to newer ones. Maybe there is a bug on a Nautilus, but I'm back in production.
I think
you see that there is this kind of ghost option on OSDs.
I think Pacific has reduced the maximum size that the MonDB can grow to. I think I've seen it be over 200 gigs on one of our big production clusters in the middle of a very large rebalance. But I think Pacific has some fixes that reduce the size it can grow to.
Yeah. Well, it's running now, Nautilus, I cannot just switch that within a night to Pacific.
Yeah.
Because there is also the clients. I think that are you anyone running Pacific and the clients on a Nautilus level? Maybe not. So I have to upgrade the RPD client side part also higher than Nautilus.
I think it depends on tunables. You can set some tunables that require newer clients, but I don't think, absent doing that, there's any problem with older clients. I think. Yeah. Don't quote me on that.
It's doable, but I prefer upgrading them as a whole to Pacific. But this time it was Nautilus, and we had this problem. So be aware that there might be still some bugs on the Nautilus, even it's of end of life stuff.
Any other outages anybody want to talk about? I did see somebody dropped a small description in chat. I think I see Chris Palmer's trying to talk, but it's coming through very choppy, just so you know. If you can hear that. Sorry, I'm just reading the chat message here quick. Good TLDR, don't put monitors on both public and cluster networks. It looked like somebody did that they also had switches disappear, kind of similar to my outage. And for them, it looked like they just, once they restarted stuff and not it all came back fine. That's great to hear.
Yeah, that worked quite fine. So I don't know what happened to the switches. We don't manage them, and they disappeared. And and a lot of the OSDs were set to have disappeared, and we just had to restart them, and then everything came back really. So that's all good.
It's nice when it all works like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I do have a weird question, and I'm not sure if that's a problem, but on busy clients, we get loose connections to the monitors quite regularly, and they come back within a second, but it happens a lot. So I wonder if that's a problem or if that's expected behavior.
Are you talking about for like CephFS clients, I'm guessing?
CephFS, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
In my personal experience, I don't use CephFS hugely with thousands of clients, only 100 or whatever. But they seem fairly consistent in maintaining their connections even when they're under load.
So it works. I'm sort of just wondering if there's sort of some performance hit also, or is something that we should chase up. But so we do have quite a lot of, so it's basically shared compute nodes, so that where we've got 50, 60 users, and they've got their own home directories on Ceph. So it is quite busy. But we don't see any problems with it, so it's all working as expected.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Is there any QoSing on your network that could be prioritizing other traffic over the standard, just the way that the clients ping them out?
We don't have anything like that set up. So
okay.
It's 10 gig and yeah.
Magnus, about my question, I asked because I saw if you're using systemd, of course, that when there are problems with some connections, the OSD process will stop, and then it will be restarted by systemd. And in our configuration, we have restart only 3 times, and then the process will go down. So after some huge issues with network, we have to restart all OSDs, but the problem is not with the Ceph software, but with the network and the underlayer of systemd. So my question was, the core of the problem was some Ceph software with code, some bugs, or with just the operating system under it?
Yes. So we do have the database and the data on a single disk. So that's not the problem. I think I can't remember, they were disabled, and I think systemd has put them into failed state. I can't quite remember what happened, and I just had to manually restart those OSDs. And that was the trick. It could be an issue with the underlying OS, and so why I'm hesitant is because our systems are configuration managed, and we use sort of a very odd flavor of configuration management, which is sort of non-standard. So we use LCFG to manage our systems, and so Ceph doesn't sit very easily with that, but it's working. But yeah, so in this case, manually restarting the OSDs just did the trick.
Okay, I get it. So it's a problem that the state of the process was on failure in systemd. Okay, thanks.
I think so. I can't remember. It's a little while ago, and I just noticed there's a whole bunch of them. It didn't come back, and I just manually restarted them and watched that.
Okay, thanks.
All right. I guess just one of the next things on the list here was the Nautilus end of life. has everybody pretty much moved on to Octopus or Pacific now from Nautilus, or is us still on that as well? Just planning at this point to move forward.
So we are still on Nautilus, and some other schools at the University of Edinburgh, they are looking to deploy Ceph, and we're going to wait and see what they are doing, and then we're going to use their configuration basically to upgrade our cluster. We have to figure out what we do. We are a bit worried about the containerization because we just don't know how that will play with our managed systems yet, and we just haven't had the time yet to deal with that. We know we need to sort this out as soon as possible, really.
Yeah, I'm in a similar boat. I'm all on Nautilus still, and just a matter of finding time with everything going on. I want to do some CentOS 8 or Stream upgrades at the same time, and I gotta shuffle some things around, shuffle mons in and out, upgrade things. 3 different clusters to do it too, so it's just one of these days I just need to bite the bullet and start on the test cluster and go from there. I expect it'll happen soon now with the Nautilus end of life. One thing I was kind of curious about was if anybody was trying Rocky Linux. If you haven't heard, that's the new CentOS. And I think they kind of have a fairly stable release now, and if anybody was considering stuff on Rocky Linux, we're all just going to stick with the CentOS Stream, Ubuntu, or whatever we're using now instead of trying a new distro.
We're planning to move to Rocky. This is Graham from Minnesota Supercomputing Institute, and we're currently CentOS 7 and have been kind of waiting to see what happened with the CentOS 8 world. And I think Rocky's our default choice. We haven't actually started moving yet. And we're still running Nautilus for that matter, and thinking about moving on to Octopus at least. But we're still on CentOS 7, so there's certain parts of, I guess, Octopus that won't work on 7, like the dashboard. Not that we really use that.
Yeah, that's where I want to do, like, move my mons to CentOS 8 at the bare minimum. Go to Octopus.
And then, like, looking further forward, we manage our clusters using Puppet, but to be honest, I always found Ceph deploy the easiest thing for deploying Ceph itself, and that's going away. I think it's still present in Octopus, as far as I can tell. I think I saw it as an RPM, but I guess it's not going to be around for long, and we'll need to come up with something different for Pacific. It sounds like, the container-based deployment, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but isn't necessarily ready for prime time on larger clusters.
There was earlier some scalability problems if you go like 64 or beyond OSD servers. But I think that they have improved a lot during this year about the deployment tools. We haven't yet tested that because we tried with the 32 and 64 OSD servers, and we are having the same phase like the others, so we need to phase out the CentOS 7 and Python 2.7, and we are heading to CentreStream because I think that's one way to go to Rocky Linux if you have kind of upgrade from CentOS 7 to something 8-ish, like CentOS 8 or CentOS 8 Stream. So that's our approach. So we will go with the CentOS 8 with a fixed set of RPMs. So we are not updating daily. We are deploying the whole cluster with the same subset, and then we have a test cluster where to test new packages. And when we are happy with that, then we go and upgrade. I know that's clumsy comparing to some other approaches, but at least the time being, I think that's the easiest way for us. So we will take a snapshot of CentOS 8 time to time and then build from that.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are still slightly hesitant on the containerization aspect of the newer versions. But it has its ups and downs. And well, I'll be interested to hear how things work out on Rocky for Graham, and saw that Sebastian in the chat was going to do Rocky as well. So maybe in a future meeting, you guys can give us a review of how that's going for you.
Yeah, we'd be happy to. I think we'll be in the same situation as you, but we'll just have to upgrade the mons first. And
yeah,
let OSDs live on 7. I guess there's no, until at least, I guess Pacific might force that upgrade.
Yeah, I think Pacific was only built for, EL 8 RPMs and not doing 7 anymore, if I recall correctly. So somebody could correct me if I'm wrong on that, please do. Well, that kind of runs through there's nothing left on the topic list. Does anybody want to throw something out there, or any other quick thoughts, concerns, slightly stuff related?
I was just going to say in passing, thanks for pointing out the 14 terabyte drive firmware issue. I just looked up how HPE drives and they're affected. So.
Scared to look at all my drive firmware now. Many of them. I don't want to know. It's running. All right. Well, if nobody's got anything else, thanks for joining. The next one, we do these about every 2 months. So November 24th, it looks like, is probably the next one. I'll obviously send out the list emails. And if you want, I also send out a private email to people who have asked me to add them to my list, or if you put your information on the sign-in section of the pad, I kind of put that into my personal email list as well. So if you want the private email reminder for this meeting, throw your email address up there, or contact me directly if you don't want it publicly on the list. Otherwise, thanks everybody for joining. Great talking to you all, and we'll see you in about 2 months.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good to hear you after this break.
Yeah, like I said, sorry, life and work got me busy and I missed one there. I do apologize for not staying on top of getting this meeting.
Okay, bye.
Good. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, bye. Bye. Thanks a lot. Bye. See ya.